Chapter 11. The car only went 30 giant steps before it commenced the bucking and finally cut right off. The vampire finally caught up with me. He was looking very surprised. He just tapped on the window with his knuckle and said, "Roll the window down for a minute, bud." Sometimes it's terrible to have been brought up proper. I couldn't help myself. I rolled down the window just enough so the words could get in and out, but not his hands or his claws. He said, "Okay, what's this?" I said, "Don't you think I can read? How come you're carrying real human blood around in your car?" I showed him my jackknife. "I'm a warning you. I know how to kill vampires. This knife is a genuine solid 24-karat silver." He put both hands over his face and shook his head back and forth a couple times. He said, "Sweet baby Jesus, why me?" He then said, "Bud, if I were from Flint, I might think you believe that you're in Grand Rapids, boy. You've got to be smarter than that. If I was a vampire, why have I got a sandwich and a bottle of red pop?" I thought for a second. The answer jumped out. "Bait?" He put both hands over his face. This time he pulled them away and he was laughing. He said, "Bud, if a vampire was going to have to catch little boys, I just have to stick my fangs out into one of those bottles and have supper. Besides, where have you ever heard of a vampire who knew how to drive a car?" That made sense. In all the moving pictures shows I'd seen in the books and I'd read about vampires, I'd never could think of seeing one that could drive a car. But I wasn't going to take any chances. "Could I please see your teeth, sir?" "What?" "Your teeth, sir." The man mumbled something, shook his head again. He leaned close to the window glass and opened his mouth. I could see he didn't have any fangs. His teeth still looked kind of scary, though. They looked like they could bite pretty good grapefruit-sized chunk out of you. Then he said, "Bud, I've got to get this blood to Hurley Hospital in Flint. They need it right away for someone's operation. I can look at you and tell you're far smart to believe that any nonsense like vampire, son. Be a good boy and open the door." So I pulled the lock in for him and scooted over to my passenger side of the car. I unlocked the door just in case he had any tricks up his sleeve. He got in the car and said, "You'll never know how grateful I am to you, bud. I'll take that horrible image of you putting the car in gear to drive away while I stood by the side of the road in Owasso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning to my grave with me. Thank God you don't know how to drive." "No, sir, but you'd have showed me some things. I'd have learned real quick." Just in case, I watched the way he put the car in gear, so the next time something like this happened, I knew how to get away. Me and the man headed back towards Flint, driving the car on the same road it took me to walk so long to walk. Going like this, I was never going to get away from this doggone city. We'd have been driving for a minute before he started asking a slew of questions. Questions I had to be very careful about giving the right answers to. He said, "Do you feel bad about worrying your mother like this, Bud, not Buddy?" "My mother's dead, sir." Most of the times, if you tell an adult that, they'll leave you alone. But this man. "What? I'm sorry to hear that, Bud. So you stay with your daddy?" "Yes, sir." "Right, in Grand Rapids?" "Yes, sir." "What's his name?" "Does he work for the railroad?" "No, sir." The seed started sticking its head out further and further. "His name is Herman E. Calloway, and he plays for the biggest doggone fiddle you've ever seen." The man shouted, "What?" I said, "Really, sir, I swear." "'Fore God and the biggest fiddle of the world." He said, "I know your father. Everybody in Grand Rapids does." I didn't say anything. He said, "Well, I'll be. You know, the first glimpse, I wouldn't say you look that much like Herman, but now that I look at you, I suppose you do. Of course, he's quite a bit bigger, if you know what I mean." This was the best news I have heard all day. My face nearly split from the giant smile. "Yes, sir. Folks say I'm a spitting image of my old man." He really started shooting some questions at me, just so to stop him. I said, "Sir, can I please have my sandwich and the rest of the red pop before I answer any more questions?" He slapped his forehead and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I was so surprised at who you are and happy that you didn't drive off that I forgot about that ordeal." He handed me the sandwich and the pop and the apple. I was so hungry that I forgot all about scraping the mustard off the bologna sandwich. And it even like that it was the best sandwich I'd ever had in my life, Bud. He said, "My name's Mr. Lewis. Now, if you were about 15, 20 years old, you could call me Lefty, but you're not, so you can't. Mr. Lewis will do just fine." He shoved the part of the sandwich that I was chewing on into the side of my mouth so I could say, "Yes, sir, Mr. Lewis, sir." He said, "I'm not ashamed to admit it. You gave me a scare here tonight that I'll never forget. Just know be having nightmares about meeting you for the rest of my life. I'll wake up in a cold sweat many a night with a picture of you in my car pulling away in the blood in that seat. I can still see it all now. I'll be sound asleep deep in the middle of a Ruth Dandridge dream when all of a sudden I'll be standing on the side of the road in Owasso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning, and I'll be seeing my car and that blood pulling away, nothing of you showing but that little peanut head of yours peeking up over the dash." He looked at me out of the side of his eyes. "Anyone ever tell you you got a little peanut head?" I clugged down the pop I'd been swishing around my mouth and said, "No, sir." "Well," he said, "this may be the first time, but unless you undergo some major surgery, I bet it won't be the last." "Yes, sir." He waited a second, then sounded kind of disappointed. Then he said, "Don't take it too so seriously, Bud. I'm teasing you, you know." I stared at the started in on the apple. "Yes, sir." "Ever been in the army, Bud?" "No, sir." "Well, I've got to tell you, I haven't heard so many sirs since I was back at Fort Gordon in Georgia training for the big war." I almost said yes, sir, but I looked at him and guessed he was still teasing me. I took another drink of red pop and saw that I was raising the bottle. I accidentally let some of the sandwich slip out of my mouth down into the pop. There was a couple of chunks of chewed up bread and a blob of bologna and mustard swimming around in that bottle. The mustard was real pretty. It looked like it was some kind of magical fog. Every time I moved the bottle, the mustardy smoke went into a different kind of shape. Lefty said, "How about sharing that pop, Bud?" Uh-oh. He looked like He took one look and handed it back. He said, "Nothing personal, Bud, but I've raised 3 kids and have 2 grandkids. I've learned the hard way about drinking after young folks, but I do believe you need to get in and see a doctor soon, son. It looks like to me that you've got a serious backwash problem. That's most of food I've ever seen. That's the most food I've ever seen floating around in a bottle of pop. In fact, that doesn't even look like red pop anymore. It looks like red stew." I really quick chugged the rest of the pop down and ate the apple real slow, 'cause I figured as soon as it was done, the questions would start up again. Lefty Lewis said, "Aren't you sleepy?" This was perfect. I could just pretend falling asleep and come up with the answers that could get me to Grand Rapids for sure. I yawned real big. "Oh, a little bit, sir." "All right, here, give me that core. I think the only thing that's left is a seed or two, anyways." I handed him the apple core, and he put it in the wax paper from the sandwich in the bag. "You just stretch out there and have some sleep. In about an hour, you'll be nice and in a nice, comfortable bed. We can have our talk in the morning." We reached the back seat, and he said, "Here," and he handed me a jacket. "You can use this for a blanket." The jacket smelled real good, like spice and soap. Lefty Lewis said, "Oh, Bud Not Buddy, one more thing before you doze off. Could you reach over into that box and hand me one of those bottles of blood? I haven't had a bite to eat all day." I kept my eyes closed and smiled. I knew I was going to be safe because I've never heard a vampire say that they could drive a car, and I've never seen one that had such a good sense of humor. Besides, I left my jackknife open under my leg, and he looked like he'd believe me when I told him it was made out of real silver, even though it probably wasn't. As soon as I had the jacket over, the smell of the spice and soap and the sound of the crickets and the toady frogs outside made my eyes get real heavy. Wow, I must have been real tired. Walking and ducking in and out of the bushes between Flint and Owasso was a lot more work than I thought it was. Most of the time since Mama died. If someone even walks close to where I'm sleeping, I am up in a flash. My eyes fly open, and I'm looking right at them. At one of the foster houses where I stayed, a woman told me that she knew I was going to be a criminal because anyone who sleeps that light has got to have a guilty conscience. Most of the time, the the sound of someone else's going from sleep breathing to awake breathing in the same room is enough for me to get up. But this morning I felt like it was the bottom of the well and that someone had filled it with tons of thick chocolate pudding. Someone was calling my name from way up top the well. She was saying, "Bud, Bud, Bud." Waves from the pudding were slogging me back and forth and back and forth. "Bud, wake up, Bud." It was a woman's voice. Her hands were trying to shake me awake. Uh-oh, this is number 29 of my rules. Rules and things number 29. When you wake up and don't know for sure where you are at, and there's a bunch of people standing around you, it's best to pretend you're still asleep until you can figure out what's going on and what you should do. I kept my eyes closed and acted like I was out cold. The woman said, "Papa, what on earth are all those lumps and bites on this baby's face?" The man answered, "Well, he was walking all the way from Grand Rapids to Flint. It looks like he provided a pretty paltry meal for every mosquito on the way." The woman said, "This poor child must be dead. I hate getting him up. I wish he could stay with us for a little while, at least until he's had his sleep." Then I remembered who I was with, Lefty Lewis. He said, "I know. I've got to get back. He can sleep in the car on the way to Grand Rapids." The woman rolled up the blanket they'd put over me and said, "Papa, look at his legs. This boy's as skinny as a rail." Shucks. They'd taken off my knickers when they put me to bed. Now I was going to have to pretend I was asleep even longer, at least until I could figure out how to get being so embarrassed. Lewis said, "Yeah, he's puny. Good thing his legs don't touch when he walks, 'cause if those two twigs got rubbing against one another, he'd have a fire going in no time." The woman said, "That's not funny. He doesn't look like he's been fed right. Now, who's his father again? You said you know him? Everyone in Grand Rapids does. Surprised you can't remember him. He's quite a big fish there." See, I told you it was smart to pretend you were asleep some of the time. Now I was going to learn something about my father. The woman said, "What kind of man is he that he lets this child be so thin? And look in the condition of this boy's clothes. Everything is either too small for him or almost to tatters. Where is this child's mother? There's not much of woman's touch here about him." Lefty said, "It seems to me that Mrs. Calloway I knew passed a long time ago. The boy says he's 10, and I'm sure she died quite before that. But few Mrs. Calloways I don't know anything about." That meant that my dad was married to someone before he married my mom. Lefty Lewis' daughter said, "Well, I think it's a sin. I'm a half a mind to keep this boy for a while, put some fear of his daddy's heart, but he probably wouldn't even miss him." Lefty Lewis said, "Now, you stop being so judgmental. Herman's got a reputation for being no nonsense, not mean. Does this child have any brothers or sisters? I believe he's got a sister, but she'd have to be his half sister. She must be full grown by now." The woman pulled the blanket over my legs, shook me again. I was glad I could stop pretending I was asleep. I was sick and tired of hearing about how skinny I am and what a mixed up family I come from. She said real soft, "Bud, wake up. Come on, sweetie. I've got a nice breakfast waiting for you." Food. I started blinking and acting like those were the first words I heard in the morning, and I hear, "Huh?" like I was confused. The woman smiled real big and said, "Oh, I see that got your attention, didn't it? Good morning, young man." "Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Mr. Lewis," he said. "Hey, you remembered my name. I'm impressed. Good morning, Walking Willie. We've got to hit the road in a bit. Better hurry up and get some food in your belly." He acted like he was whispering just to me when he said, "The food in this joint ain't the best, but I guarantee after you eat here before you're hungry, you won't be hungry for days. This meal is going to be sitting in your stomach like a rock for a good long time." The woman said, "Ignore him, Bud. My father doesn't mean anything. He just can't stop teasing." I said, "I know, ma'am. He told me I've got a head shaped like a peanut." The woman slapped her father on the arm. "Papa, I can't believe you've teased this child already. What is it on your mind?" Lefty Lewis rubbed his hand over my head and said, "Look at this noggin. I rest my case. Boy looks like one of George Washington Carver's experiments. Sprouted legs and run off. You sure you're not a Tuskegee, Alabama, Bud?" I said, "No, sir." The woman sucked her lower lip and swallowed a smile before she said, "See, Bud, he can't help himself. But he really doesn't mean anything. Do you, Papa?" The way she asked that, you've been pretty stupid not to know how to answer her. Lefty Lewis said, "Not a thing. It's just that you," her daughter spoke up. "My name is Mrs. Sleet, Bud. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Now, while you wash up, I'm going to get some clothes that my boy outgrew a while ago, barely been used. So when you get dressed, you come down and we'll eat. You chose a great day to visit. We're having a very special breakfast today: pancake sausage and toast, and a big glass of orange juice. You can meet Scott and Kim, too. How's that sound?" "That sounds real good, ma'am. Thank you very much." "Don't mention it. It's a pleasure to have such a well-mannered young visitor." Mrs. Sleet and Lefty Lewis left the room. As soon as they were a little bit down the hall, I could hear her start in on scolding her father. "I just can't believe you. You know Mama was right about you." All I could hear next was him mumbling some answer, and then her slapping his arm again. After I got out of the bathroom, I saw Mrs. Sleet had put some clothes on the bed. My clothes were gone, all except my drawers, which I hadn't taken off. She'd get even put some clean drawers out for me, so when I put them on, I stuck my old ones down in the pocket of my new pants. I could ditch them when I got to Grand Rapids. It's too embarrassing to have strangers look at your dirty drawers, even if the stranger is as nice as Mrs. Sleet. The new clothes were just a little bit too big, but they were long pants and not knickers, so I didn't care. I rolled the cuffs into the pants and the sleeves so they fit pretty doggone good. Man, my first pair of trousers. I let my nose lead me down where the smell of the pancakes and toast was coming from. The Sleets had a room for eating. It had a big table right in the middle of it, and the first thing I noticed was a huge pile of pancakes sitting in the blue and white plate on top of the table. Lefty Lewis was sitting with Mrs. Sleet's kids, and the little girl had a big smile, and the boy was looking at me kind of hard. It wasn't one of those put up your dukes kind of looks. It was just a look like a dog gives another dog that he might be passing through his neighborhood. Lefty Lewis said, "But these two worrisome midgets are my favorite grandkids. Kim is my favorite granddaughter, and Scott is my favorite grandson. Of course, they're my only grandkids, so that in fairness, you've got to say that they're the at least my so they're my least favorite grandkids also." These two kids had a lot of practice being around their teasing of their granddad, because they didn't even pay him any mind at all. I said, "Hi, my name is Bud, not Buddy." The little girl said, "That's a strange name, Bud, not Buddy." And everyone thought she was kind of young and scrawny for to be. She was kind of young and scrawny to be teasing folks. I could tell by the way exactly what she was doing. Lefty Lewis laughed and said, "That's my girl." Then he went into the kitchen. Scott looked up to make sure the grown folks weren't around. He said, "You really run away from home?" I had to stop and think a minute. It's one thing to lie to a grown up. Most adults want to hear something that lets them take their attention off of you and put it on something else. That makes it easy for them not to feel bad to lie to them. You really just have to be giving them what they want. It's different when you're with another kid. Most times, kids really do want to know what they're asking you. I guess I've been thinking too long because you said, "You run all the way from Grand Rapids to Owasso? Was it 'cause your daddy used to beat you?" I could I could answer that with a swear for God truth. Shucks, my daddy never laid a hand on me in his life. Then how come you run? I didn't like where I was. That wasn't a lie. Well, if you were lying about your daddy beating you, You better scram right after breakfast, 'cause my Gramps is taking you straight back home. My daddy never laid a hand on me. The little girl said, Scott, you talk too much. Let him sit down. Then she told me, Mama's gonna bring up the sausages in a minute. You like sausages? Uh-huh. I'd never had sausages before, but if that was what's making the house smell so good, I was going to love it. Kim said, Good, 'cause my grandpa brought them all the way from Grand Rapids. He always brings us good food. And where we're going to share it with you because Mama says you're a special guest and we have to treat you real nice. Am I being nice? So far. Good. I'll make a deal with you. Uh-oh. What kind of deal? I'll sing a song that I made up all by myself when I'm done, and I'll ask you one question and you have to answer and cross your heart to tell the truth. This didn't sound too bad. Okay, here it goes. It took me a very long time to make this song, so I hope you like it. The boy said, Oh, brother. Kim sang, Mommy says no, Mommy says no, I listen to you, wah, wah, wah. The building falls down, the building falls down. You get crushed, I don't, wah, wah, wah. That was the worst song I'd ever heard. Kim stood up and bowed like a princess. I clapped my hands together, soft under the table. She said, Thank you very much. Scott shook his head. Kim, okay. That's my part of the deal. Now you keep your part of the deal for the question I ask, okay? Now, can you tell me about how your mother died? Scott's foot kicked her under the table. Who told you my mama died? The little girl said, Oops, and then stuffed something from her hand under her mouth. My mama got sick. She died real fast. She didn't feel no pain or no suffering. Kim said, Oh, I hope my mother never dies. Stupid, everybody gonna die, Scott said. Kim said, Oh, I'm telling Mama you called me stupid. He said, You do, and I'll tell her that you've got one of those pancakes in the pocket of your dress. She shut right up. I told her, Hey, right, everybody's got to die. It's not sad unless they do it real slow and suffer. My mama's died so quick and painless that she didn't even have time to close her eyes. She didn't even have time to make a face like she was hurting. Both lefties, Lewis's grandkids, looked real surprised at this news. Mrs. Sleet came into the room with another blue plate covered with little round pieces of meat. Those had to be sausages. She saw the way the kids were looking at me with their mouths half open and said, Now you two aren't talking Bud's ear off, are you? Scott said, No, Mama, I'm not. But Kim's coming real close too. Kim said, I was not. I was just making pleasant conversation. Mrs. Street laughed and set the plate on the table right in front of me. Lefty Lewis came out with a big jug full of orange juice and sat down next to me. Mr. Sleet, Mrs. Sleet sat down and said, Scott and Kim, would you say grace, please? Everyone ducked their heads down, and the two kids said, God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. Amen. Then people started passing the big blue plates around, stabbing the toast and pancakes and sausages with their forks. I watched to see how much everyone tried to take the same. When I started to watch how much food the other two kids put on their fork every time so I wouldn't look like a pig, Lefty noticed I was taking a long time and told his daughter, See what I told you, Nina? Poor Bud, not Buddy, is so skinny and his stomach has shrunk down so much that just smelling the food got this boy full. Oh well, I guess that just means more food for the rest of us. Everyone except for me and Mrs. Sleet yelled for a big cheer. Eating with the Sleets and Lefty Lewis was really hard to do, not because they had the tape, not because I had bad table manners or nothing, because they talked through the whole breakfast. They kept trying to get me to talk too. At the home, after Grace was said, we were always we weren't allowed to say boo. Eating and being quiet was a hard habit to break. Every time one of the Sleets would talk to me and look at me like they expected an answer, I'd look around first to make sure no one was watching. At the home, if you got caught talking during mealtime, you'd have to get up and leave your food. If the Sleets had to live under those rules, they'd all starve to death. They talked with every swallow. They talked after they drank they took every drink they took. They talked whilst they were wiping their lips. Shucks, the little girl Kim talked with milk running down her throat. Some of the time, her words got slugged up by what she was swallowing, and they laughed. Man, did they laugh! It was hard to tell whose story they were laughing at. They were doing so much chattering. Lefty Lewis was talking about radio shows, and Scott was talking about the baseball game to watch, and Lefty Lewis pitched. And Kim was talking about a little girl that she didn't like, and Mrs. Sleet was talking about some people called the Red Caps. Kim said to her mother, "Mommy, can't you tell that Bud Not Buddy doesn't know what a red cap is? You gotta explain better." Mrs. Sleep said, "Oh, sorry, Bud. Red caps are the men who work on the railroad station loading the trains and taking people's bags to the cars. That's what Mr. Lewis does. My husband is a Pullman porter. He takes care of the people once they're on the trains," Kim said. "Yeah, our dad gets to travel all over the country in trains for free," Scott said. "That's 'cause he's working, not for free. He gets paid to do it." Lefty Lewis swallowed a big hunk of sausage and said, "And do you know what, Bud? I bet the thing he misses most is Nina's cooking. I can't tell you how proud I am of how far my daughter's cooking has come. This might be hard to believe, but she used to be such a bad cook that her fried chicken was known to have turned a chicken hawk into a vegetarian." Scotty and Kim and Mrs. Sleep started busting a gut. "Yep," Lewis said. "I bought a friend of Flynn a couple years ago, and even though I'd warned him, he tried to be polite and ate 4 of her pancakes. Poor soul, held his stomach all the way back to Grand Rapids. Said to me, 'Lefty, I don't mean to show any disrespect, but those were not pancakes your daughter served me. They were pain cakes.'" Mrs. Sleet started laughing along with everyone and said, "Well, I'm sure I don't need to hear any more of this." She picked up the empty sausage plate and went into the kitchen. As soon as she got out of the room, Kim whispered, "Quick, Grandpa, tell Bud Not Buddy how many times you had to pull the car over when you were going back to Grand Rapids so that man could get out and vomit on the side of the road." Before Lefty Lewis could answer, Mrs. Sleet came out of the kitchen with a big wooden spoon and whooped her father with a good lick on the head.